I thought this was going to be a peaceful trip. Just me, my boyfriend, and our friends, escaping the noise of the world. But I was wrong. So very wrong. Something out there was watching us, mimicking us. And by the time we realized it wasn't human, it was too late. If you enjoy eerie, spine-chilling stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next unsettling tale. The plan was simple: escape the noise of the world for a few days. I thought camping in the remote Guadalupe Mountains National Park would be the perfect getaway. No emails, no deadlines, just me, my boyfriend Ryan, his best friend Tyler, and Tyler's sister Sarah. We had an old RV, barely held together by duct tape and hope, but it had charm, or so Ryan kept insisting. We set out late that afternoon, the sun casting golden light across the jagged peaks in the distance. The drive was long and silent, except for Sarah flipping through her book of local legends in the back seat. She always had a thing for creepy stories, and today was no exception. "Did you know this place has a history of strange disappearances?" she asked, her voice chipper. Ryan rolled his eyes from the driver's seat. "Let me guess, skinwalkers?" "Actually, yes," Sarah perked up, adjusting her glasses. "They're from Navajo folklore. Shapeshifters. They can mimic voices to lure their victims. People vanish out here all the time." "Great," Tyler muttered, leaning against the passenger window. "Because nothing says relaxation like mythical murder monsters." I chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Come in." It's just a story. Besides, we'll be fine. We've got Ryan to protect us." "Exactly," Ryan said with a grin, patting the steering wheel. "And this baby's built like a tank. Nothing's getting through." I wasn't so sure. The RV rattled ominously every time we hit a bump. As we pulled into the park, the scenery was breathtaking. Towering cliffs framed the horizon, and the air was still and dry. But there was something unsettling about the silence. No birds, no insects, just the occasional gust of wind brushing against the rocks. "Creepy," Sarah whispered, her nose pressed against the window. "Peaceful," Ryan corrected, parking the RV near a secluded clearing. "Let's get set up before it gets dark." The evening passed without much incident. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and joked about the legends Sarah was so eager to share. By the time we crawled into the RV for the night, the air outside had grown colder, and shadows danced across the rocky terrain under the moonlight. I woke up around midnight, jolted by a faint tapping sound. At first I thought it was the wind, but the rhythm was too deliberate. It wasn't coming from the roof or the walls, it was at the window. Holding my breath, I peeked through the curtain. There was nothing there, just darkness. The tapping stopped. The next morning I mentioned it to Ryan, but he laughed it off. "Probably just a branch or something. You're overthinking it." Maybe he was right. But as I stepped outside to stretch, I froze. Tiny footprints circled the RV, too small to belong to any of us, and there weren't any trees nearby. "Ryan," I called out, my voice barely steady. "Come look at this." He stepped out of the RV, squinting against the morning sun. "What now?" I pointed to the footprints, small and erratic, circling the vehicle like a child had been running laps around us in the dead of night. "Do you see this? They're too small to be any of ours." Ryan crouched down, examining the prints with a bemused expression. "Probably some animal. Coyotes, maybe." "Coyotes don't walk on 2 feet, I shot back, glancing nervously at the empty expanse around us. "Relax, Emma," he said with a shrug, brushing it off like everything else. "If it were something dangerous, we'd know by now." His nonchalance didn't sit well with me, but before I could argue, Sarah and Tyler emerged from the RV, yawning and stretching. "What's going on?" Sarah asked, noticing my unease. "Nothing," Ryan said quickly, shooting me a look. "Just some footprints." Probably animals. Sarah frowned, kneeling to take a closer look. Those don't look like animal tracks to me. Can we not turn everything into a ghost story? Tyler groaned, running a hand through his messy hair. I'm starving. Let's make breakfast then. Forget about the spooky footprints. I bit my lip, reluctant to let it go, but the others had already moved on. Ryan started up the propane stove, Tyler rifled through the cooler, and Sarah perched on a nearby rock with her book of legends. As we ate, the wind picked up, carrying a strange, electric stillness with it. It wasn't the soothing breeze you'd expect in a remote park. It felt heavier, almost alive. Sarah flipped a page in her book. You know, there's this story about a group of hikers who disappeared near here. The locals said they heard laughter at night, but when they went to check, no one was there. They found their campsite abandoned the next morning, all their stuff still there. Like they'd just vanished. Tyler groaned. Why do you always do this? Can't we just have one trip where you don't tell us creepy bedtime stories? Hey, it's interesting, Sarah defended. Besides, it's not like I'm making this up. Does it matter? Ryan cut in. We're here to enjoy ourselves, not freak ourselves out. Still, the story lingered in my mind. I stared out at the landscape, at the jagged cliffs and vast emptiness, and wondered just how easy it would be to vanish out here. That night, we decided to build another fire. The flames crackled, casting flickering light across the rocky ground. Ryan and Tyler tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. As the fire died down and we retreated to the RV, I caught a glimpse of movement in the distance. Just a shadow, darting too quickly for me to process. I didn't sleep at all that night. By the third morning, I was running on fumes. Sleep had been impossible, and my nerves were frayed. The others seemed fine, chatting over coffee and joking about our plans for the day. But I couldn't shake the image of the shadow I'd seen the night before, darting across the edge of our campsite like it was testing our boundaries. Ryan suggested we take a short hike to explore the nearby trails. I hesitated but didn't want to be the one to spoil the trip. We'll stick close to the RV, he said reassuringly, noticing my unease. Nothing's going to happen. The trail wound through a narrow canyon, the walls towering high above us. The sunlight barely reached the ground, casting everything in an eerie half-light. Sarah lagged behind, her head buried in her book, while Tyler stomped ahead, teasing her about falling for every ghost story she read. I'm just saying, Sarah muttered, flipping a page. There's a reason people talk about this place. The Guadalupe Mountains are sacred to some tribes. They say the spirits of the land don't like to be disturbed. Tyler groaned dramatically. Alive and well. I stayed quiet, scanning the cliffs around us. The silence was unnerving. No birds, no wind. Just the crunch of our boots against the rocky trail. It felt like we were walking through a place we didn't belong, and the land knew it. About half a mile in, Sarah suddenly stopped. Did you hear that? The rest of us froze. Hear what? Ryan asked, his voice low. It sounded like laughing. She looked over her shoulder, back toward the RV, her face pale. Tyler scoffed. Probably just the wind. Don't freak yourself out. But I'd heard it too. Faint and distant, like children's laughter carried on the breeze. We decided to turn back after that, the unease settling over the group like a heavy blanket. Ryan tried to lighten the mood by pointing out interesting rock formations, but even he seemed on edge. When we got back to the campsite, something felt off immediately. The fire pit we'd carefully arranged was scattered, ash and soot smeared across the ground like it had been clawed apart. The cooler was open, its contents spilled across the dirt. Did a bear get into our stuff? Tyler asked, walking over to inspect the mess. There aren't any Bears here, Sarah replied quietly, her voice trembling. Ryan crouched near the fire pit, picking up a large, jagged rock. This wasn't an animal, he said, his tone grave. Whatever did this wasn't just rummaging. Look at these scratches. He held up the rock, and my stomach turned. Deep gouges ran across its surface, as if something with claws had dragged it through. What the hell? Tyler muttered, backing away. I didn't respond. I was too busy staring at the ground. The small footprints were back, and this time they led straight to the RV door. That was the moment I realized something wasn't right, but it wasn't until the second night that we understood we weren't alone. Stick around to find out what happens next. If you're enjoying the story so far, drop a comment about your scariest camping experience. The footprints were all we needed to confirm what I already feared. We weren't alone out here. Yet Ryan brushed it off again, claiming it was probably just a kid from another campsite. The idea felt absurd. We hadn't seen another person for miles, and the remote spot we'd chosen wasn't exactly family-friendly. But as usual, Ryan's confidence steamrolled over my objections. Look, he said, brushing dirt off his hands. We're in the middle of nowhere. There's no cell service, no nearby rangers, just us. If we start freaking out over every little thing, we'll lose it. I wanted to argue, but Tyler jumped in, backing him up. Yeah, it's probably nothing. Maybe a coyote or something stepped funny. It doesn't mean we're about to get haunted. Sarah wasn't convinced either. She'd gone pale, clutching her book of legends tightly against her chest. Coyotes don't do this, she whispered, pointing to the perfectly circular tracks leading up to the RV door. Ryan shook his head, clearly frustrated. Fine, we'll keep an eye out tonight. But can we please just focus on having a good day? We came here to relax. No one answered, but the tension hung thick in the... As we cleaned up the scattered gear and tried to move on. That afternoon, we decided to hike out to a small spring about a mile from the campsite. The RV's water pump still wasn't working, and Ryan insisted that collecting water would take our minds off things. The trail to the spring wound through dense, dry brush, the kind that snagged on your clothes and crunched underfoot. The sun was high and unrelenting, baking the rocky terrain until it shimmered like a mirage. Sarah stayed close to me, unusually quiet. Tyler walked ahead with Ryan, cracking jokes to lighten the mood, but his usual sarcasm sounded forced. None of us wanted to admit how on edge we were. Halfway there, Sarah broke the silence. There's a story I read about this place, she said, her voice low. Tyler groaned, glancing back over his shoulder. Oh, here we go. What now? Demons? Ghost cowboys? No, Sarah said, her eyes scanning the cliffs. Skinwalkers. Ryan laughed nervously. Of course, the shape-shifting witches. Because that's exactly what we need right now. I'm serious, Sarah shot back. They're said to mimic voices to lure people away. They can take of animals, or even people. That's comforting, I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. Sarah ignored the sarcasm. They say if you hear your name in the wilderness, don't answer it, no matter what. Okay, Sarah, Ryan said, clearly trying to cut the conversation short. Enough creepy stories. But the words stayed with me. I glanced up at the cliffs again, half expecting to see something watching us. As we neared the spring, the air grew cooler, the shadows darker. That's when we saw it. Long, deep claw marks etched into a boulder, as if something had dragged its talons across the rock. Still think it's just coyotes? Sarah whispered. Ryan stepped closer to the claw marks, squinting at the jagged grooves. He ran his hand over them, brushing away some of the dust. It's probably nothing, he muttered, but his voice lacked the usual confidence. Nothing, Sarah said, her voice rising. That's not nothing, Ryan. That's something big. And strong. I mean, look at the depth of those marks. Tyler crouched next to the boulder, tracing one of the gashes with his finger. I don't know, man, he said quietly. That's not exactly normal. I don't think a bear would leave marks like this. There aren't bears out here, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound calm. At least none that I know of. Ryan stood up abruptly, dusting his hands off on his jeans. All right, we've seen it. Let's not blow this out of proportion. We need water, and the spring's just a little further ahead. Let's keep moving. No one said anything, but I could tell no one really wanted to. Even Tyler seemed to have lost his usual bravado. The spring turned out to be a small, shaded pool nestled in a hollow between two cliffs. The water was clear and cool, trickling gently over the rocks. For a moment the unease lifted as we filled our bottles and splashed some water on our faces to cool off. This place is beautiful, Sarah admitted, her earlier tension easing. See? Ryan said with a grin, trying to inject some optimism. It's not all bad, just nature doing its thing. But the peace didn't last. As we were finishing up, I heard it again. That laugh. Faint and far off, like it was carried on the wind. At first I thought I imagined it, but then Sarah stiffened, her head snapping toward the cliffs. Did you hear that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyler sighed, shaking his head. Oh, come on, not this again. It's just the wind. But it wasn't. It wasn't just a sound, it was familiar. My chest tightened as I realized why. It sounded like Sarah. Stop it, I said, my voice shaky. Stop what? Tyler asked, looking genuinely confused. I pointed toward the cliffs. It sounds like Sarah. Tyler frowned but didn't answer. Ryan stood up quickly, his face darkening. We're leaving. One argued. We made our way back to the RV in tense silence, the only sounds the crunch of our boots on the trail and the occasional rustle of dry brush. Every now and then, I swore I heard footsteps following us, but every time I looked back, there was nothing there. When we finally reached the RV, we found the door slightly ajar. I locked this before we left, Ryan said, his voice grim. Inside, everything was chaos. Our bags were open, contents strewn across the floor. The strange part? Nothing valuable was taken, just food and footprints, small ones, leading to the bed. Ryan froze in the doorway of the RV, his shoulders tense. Don't come in, he said quietly, holding up a hand to stop us. Why? Tyler asked, his voice low. Just don't, Ryan said, his tone sharper this time. Of course none of us listened. Tyler pushed past him, and I followed, with Sarah reluctantly trailing behind. The scene inside was surreal. Our bags were overturned, clothes and supplies scattered across the small living space. Empty snack wrappers were crumpled on the counter, and half-eaten granola bars littered the floor. Sarah gasped, pointing to the small, muddy footprints that covered nearly every surface. The floor, the countertop, even the edge of the bed. They were everywhere, impossibly small, and oddly deliberate, like someone, or something, had carefully explored every corner of our RV. What the hell is this? Tyler whispered, his usual sarcasm gone. Ryan knelt down to inspect the prints more closely. They're too small for a person, he muttered, his brow furrowed. Maybe a raccoon. Sarah snapped, her voice trembling. Raccoons don't leave prints like that, Ryan. Look at them, they're weird. She was right. The footprints didn't look natural. They had too many toes, and the shape was slightly off. Almost human, but not quite. Okay, Ryan said, standing up and running a hand through his hair. Let's not lose it. Whatever it was, it's gone now. Is it? I asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. What do you mean? Tyler asked. I hesitated, unsure if I should say it, but I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. What if it's still here? For a moment no one spoke. The silence in the RV was deafening, broken only by the faint creak of the wind outside. We need to leave, Sarah said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan shook his head. We're not running. We came out here to relax, and I'm not letting some weird footprints ruin that. This isn't about relaxing, Ryan, Sarah snapped. Something came into our RV, something that shouldn't be out here, and it left footprints that don't make any sense. Guys, Tyler interrupted, his tone unusually serious. Let's calm down. We'll figure this out. Maybe it's just a prank or something. A prank? Sarah said, her voice rising. By who? There's no one out here. Ryan stepped between them, holding up his hands. Enough! Staying. We'll clean up, lock the doors, and keep watch tonight. If anything else happens, we'll leave first thing in the morning. Deal? I didn't like it, but I nodded, too tired to argue. Sarah looked furious, but she relented, retreating to her bunk with her book clutched tightly in her hands. That night, as we locked the RV doors and shut the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Somewhere, just beyond the faint glow of the RV's lights, something was waiting. And it wasn't done with us yet. Night fell quickly, as it often does in the desert, and the once vibrant colors of the cliffs faded into deep, foreboding shadows. Inside the RV, we tried to return to normal, cooking dinner on the small stove, joking half-heartedly about the day's events. But no one was laughing anymore. Every sound outside made us flinch, and the silence between us was suffocating. Sarah buried her nose in her book, muttering quietly about folklore and myths. Tyler sat by the table, tapping nervously on his phone, though the screen remained stubbornly black. Ryan stood guard by the window, staring out into the darkness. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm the anxiety clawing at my chest. Every instinct told me we shouldn't be here. Did anyone else hear footsteps earlier? Sarah asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Ryan sighed, his shoulders slumping. We've been over this, Sarah. It's probably animals. Animals don't mimic voices, she shot back, her tone sharp. I stiffened. What do you mean, mimic voices? Sarah looked up from her book, her face pale. I didn't want to say anything earlier, but when we were at the spring, I swear I heard my own voice, laughing. That's ridiculous, Tyler said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Is it? Sarah asked, her voice rising. Because I've read about things like this. Skinwalkers, spirits, whatever you want to call them. They can mimic you. They lure you in. That's enough, Ryan said firmly, glaring at her. You're just scaring everyone. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, a loud bang shook the RV. We all froze. What the hell was that? Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. Ryan motioned for us to stay quiet, holding up his hand. He grabbed the flashlight from the counter and nodded toward the door. No, I hissed, grabbing his arm. Don't go out there. We have to see what it is, Ryan whispered back. The banging came again, louder this time, followed by a scraping sound that made my skin crawl. It was coming from the back of the RV. Stay here, Ryan said, his voice low but steady. He crept toward the back window, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The rest of us stayed rooted in place, barely breathing. Do you see anything? Tyler asked, his voice shaky. Ryan didn't respond. He stood still, his flashlight trained on something outside. What is it? I whispered, my stomach twisting. Ryan finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "There's someone out there." Before we could process his words, a new sound joined the scratching. A laugh. Not just any laugh, it was Ryan's laugh. But he was standing right in front of us. The laugh came again, distorted and hollow, echoing through the darkness like a mocking taunt. "Get away from the window!" Sarah cried. Ryan stumbled back, his face pale. "It's not human," he muttered. And then the banging stopped. We sat frozen in the RV, the air heavy with fear. Ryan's flashlight was still clutched in his hand, trembling as he stared at the back window. None of us dared to speak, the distorted laughter echoing in our minds. Whatever was out there wasn't human, and it knew we knew. "Close the blinds," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't let it see us." Ryan nodded, moving quickly but carefully to pull down the thin, flimsy blinds over the windows. I reached for the curtains by the door, my hands shaking as I tugged them shut. Tyler locked the front and back doors, double-checking each one. "Do you think it's gone?" I asked, my voice cracking. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he knelt by the window, peeking through a tiny gap in the blinds. "I don't know," he finally said, his voice grim. We all sat in silence, listening intently. The wind howled against the RV, and the faint creak of metal made it feel like the vehicle itself was holding its breath. And then we heard it. A voice. "Ryan." It came from outside, soft and drawn out, like a whisper carried on the wind. "My heart." "Ryan, come out here." It was me. My voice. Ryan turned slowly to look at me, his face pale. "Emma," he said, barely above a whisper. "What the hell?" "It's not me," I interrupted, shaking my head violently. "You know it's not me." The voice came again, louder this time. "Ryan, please, I need your help." I could see the panic in his eyes as he gripped the flashlight. "This isn't happening," he muttered, pacing back and forth. "Don't listen to it," Sarah said, her tone urgent. "Whatever it is, it's trying to lure you out. That's what they do." "They?" Tyler asked, his voice wavering. "Skinwalkers," Sarah replied. "Or spirits, demons, whatever you want to call them. They use voices to lure people out, to make you think it's someone you trust." Ryan stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. "We're not leaving. We're staying inside, keeping everything locked and waiting until morning. Whatever's out there can't get in." "I wouldn't be so sure," Tyler muttered, his eyes darting to the windows. I opened my mouth to say something, but then the RV shook violently, cutting me off. The entire vehicle jolted, the sound of scraping metal filling the air as if something heavy had slammed into the side. We all screamed, instinctively huddling together in the center of the RV. "What the hell was that?" Tyler shouted. Ryan shined his flashlight toward the source of the noise, but the beam only revealed the flimsy interior walls of the RV. The banging came again, louder this time, rattling the RV like a tin can. And then, just outside the door, we heard the voice again. "Let me in, Ryan." It was me. Only this time, it sounded broken, distorted and wrong. The RV went silent after the last bang, the distorted voice hanging in the air like a toxic mist. No one moved. No one breathed. We all stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any second. "It's not you," Ryan finally whispered, glancing at me. "It can't be you." "Of course it's not me," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm right here. Whatever's out there, it's playing with us." Tyler pressed his back against the wall, his face pale. "How is this even possible? This isn't real, right? It's just a sick prank, isn't it?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "No, this is real." She gripped her book tightly, her knuckles white. "I read about this. The stories, they're always the same. It starts with voices, Then it gets closer. I'm not letting it get closer. Suddenly, the RV shook again, harder this time. A loud scraping sound ran along the side, like claws dragging across the metal. Stay away from the windows, Sarah hissed, pulling Tyler down as he instinctively moved toward the back one. The scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie, unnatural silence. 4. A brief moment, I thought it was over. But then we heard a new sound. Tapping. It started at the back window, faint and rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then it moved. The taps traveled along the side of the RV, stopping at every window. It was as if whatever was out there was checking, searching for a way in. Do not look, Sarah whispered, her voice desperate. No matter what, don't look. My heart pounded as the tapping grew louder, moving closer to the door. Ryan held the flashlight like a weapon, his hand shaking. If it gets in, It won't get in, Sarah interrupted sharply. It can't, not unless we let it. How do you know that? Tyler asked, his voice cracking. I just do, she snapped. You don't invite things like this in. That's how it works. The tapping reached the door, and for a moment, everything went still. Then came the voice again. Ryan, it said softly, almost sweetly. Please, let me in. We all froze, staring at the door. The voice sounded exactly like me, but there was something off about it. An echo, a hollowness like it was coming from somewhere deep and unnatural. Don't answer it, Sarah whispered again. Ryan gritted his teeth, his knuckles white around the flashlight. I'm not going to, the voice called again, more insistent this time. Ryan, open the door. It's me. I need your help. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back from the door. It's not me, I said firmly. I know, he whispered. Then the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was as if the entire desert was holding its breath, waiting. And then came the laugh. It was all of our voices at once, twisted and overlapping, rising into a horrifying crescendo that made my skin crawl. The laugh echoed around us, a grotesque blend of all our voices, overlapping and distorted. It was coming from every direction, like the RV was surrounded. I felt a chill race down my spine, my body frozen in place as the sound dragged on far longer than it should have. Make it stop, Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. Please, just make it stop. It's trying to scare us, Sarah said, though her hands were trembling as she clutched her book. We can't give it what it wants. Don't react. The laughter cut off as suddenly as it began, leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed down on us like a weight. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. All we could hear was the faint whistle of the wind outside. Then came the scratching. It started low, almost imperceptible, like something sharp was dragging along the bottom of the RV. My stomach twisted as the sound grew louder, moving from one corner of the vehicle to the next. Whatever it was circling us. Ryan, I whispered, gripping his arm. What do we do? He didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the door. His face pale but determined. We wait it out, he finally said, his voice tight. It'll go away. It has to. What if it doesn't? Tyler asked, panic creeping into his voice. What if it gets in? Sarah shot him a sharp look. It can't. Not unless we let it. The scratching moved to the back of the RV, then stopped abruptly. My breath caught in my throat as I waited, listening, but the silence stretched on, suffocating. And then something hit the roof. The entire RV shook, a loud metallic thud reverberating through the space. Sarah screamed, and Tyler jumped back, pressing himself against the wall. Ryan aimed the flashlight at the ceiling, though it did little to ease the tension. "Is it on the roof?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan nodded slowly. "It sounds like it." We all stared up, listening as heavy footsteps moved across the roof, slow and deliberate. Each step sent a shudder through the RV, the sound of metal groaning under the weight. "What is it doing?" Tyler asked, his voice shaking. "It's watching us," Sarah replied, her tone grim. "It's waiting for us to make..." The footsteps stopped directly above us, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, something began to press down on the roof, the thin metal bowing inward slightly. Whatever was up there was testing the RV's limits. "Stay quiet," Ryan whispered, motioning for us to remain still. "Don't move." The pressure on the roof eased, but then the scratching started again, this time right above our heads. The sound was slow and deliberate, like claws tracing a circle. It was taunting us. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, a voice whispered from the roof, chilling and distorted. "Let me in." The whispered words from the roof sent shivers through my entire body. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they sounded. The voice was hollow, distant, and wrong, as though it came from something that didn't understand how to speak, but was trying anyway. "Let me in," it repeated, louder this time, the words stretching unnaturally. Ryan gripped the flashlight tighter, his knuckles white. "Don't move." We sat frozen, every sound amplified in the suffocating silence. The footsteps began again, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth above us. The RV groaned under the weight, the thin metal roof bowing slightly with every step. "Do you think it knows we're in here?" Tyler whispered, his voice cracking. "Of course it knows," Sarah hissed back. "That's why it's here." The footsteps stopped again, this time directly above the center of the RV. Then came a new sound, fingernails or claws, tapping lightly against the roof. It was rhythmic, almost playful, like it was enjoying the fear it was causing. "Ryan," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "What if it tries to come in?" "It won't," Sarah cut in, her voice trembling. But firm. "It can't. Not unless we open the door or invite it in. That's the rule." "And what if that rule doesn't apply here?" Tyler asked, his tone rising in panic. "What if—" "Shut up," Ryan snapped, glaring at him. "Just stay calm." But then we heard the door handle jiggle. All of us turned at once, our eyes locking on the door as it rattled violently, the handle twisting as though someone, or something, was trying to open it. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. "It's testing us," Sarah said, clutching her book tighter. "Don't move. Don't speak." The door rattling stopped abruptly, replaced by a loud bang, like something was throwing itself against the side of the RV. Each impact sent vibrations through the floor, shaking the entire vehicle. Whatever was outside wasn't giving up. Ryan stood, stepping cautiously toward the door, his flashlight pointed straight ahead. "Ryan, don't!" I whispered, reaching out to grab his arm. He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "I'm not opening it. I just need to see." He peered through the small peephole in the door, his face tight with concentration. A moment later, he stumbled back, his face pale. "It's not human," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you see?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, something hit the door with such force that it buckled inward slightly, the metal groaning under the impact. The voice came again, this time from just outside the door. "Let me in," it said, mimicking my voice perfectly. The RV began to shake violently, and the laughter returned, growing louder and louder until it was deafening. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The silence was suffocating. For a long moment we sat there in the suffocating silence, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe. The laughter had stopped, the banging was gone, and the voice no longer called out to us. All that remained was the faint whistle of the wind and the creaking of the RV as it settled into the stillness. "Is it gone?" Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. "No," Sarah said immediately, her eyes darting toward the windows. "It's not gone. It's waiting." Ryan moved back toward the door, his flashlight trembling in his grip. "We have to stay alert. If we panic, we're done." "What did you see?" I asked, my voice shaky. "You looked out there. What was it?" He hesitated, his face pale and drawn. "I don't know how to describe. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. Its face kept changing." He shuddered, running a hand through his hair. "1 second, it looked like you, Emma. Then Tyler. Then Sarah. But it was all wrong. Its eyes." He stopped, shaking his head. "They were empty." Sarah's breath hitched, and she clutched her book tighter. "It's a skinwalker," she whispered. "It has to be." "Skinwalker or not," Ryan said, his voice firmer now, "it's not getting in here. We just have to hold out until morning." "And then what?" Tyler asked, panic creeping back into his voice. "Do you think it's just going to let us leave?" Ryan glared at him. "Do you have a better idea?" I sat back on the bed, my mind racing. The silence outside felt heavier with each passing second, like the air itself was pressing down on us. I couldn't stop replaying Ryan's description in my head. A thing that could take on our faces? Our voices? The very thought made my skin crawl. Then came a new sound. A knock. Not the violent pounding we'd heard earlier, but a soft, deliberate knock. It came from the back of the RV this time. Gentle. Knock. 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 We all froze, staring at each other. It didn't stop. "Who's there?" Tyler blurted out before anyone could stop him. "Don't," Sarah hissed, grabbing his arm. "Don't talk to it!" But it was too late. The knocking paused, and then the voice came again. "It's me, Tyler," it said, perfectly mimicking his own. "Me in." Tyler's face drained of all color. He stumbled back, shaking his head violently. No, that's not me. That's not me." "It knows your name now," Sarah said grimly, her voice trembling. The knocking turned into scraping, claws dragging slowly along the side of the RV. It circled us again, the sound moving closer and closer to the door. "Stay calm," Ryan said, though his voice betrayed his fear. "It's trying to get in our heads." And then, with one final bang against the door, the voice said, "Morning won't save you." The voice's chilling words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Morning won't save you." Ryan paced the cramped RV, his flashlight beam cutting through the dim interior as if it could fend off the darkness pressing against us. Tyler sat in a corner, knees pulled to his chest, muttering to himself. Sarah was flipping frantically through her book, her lips moving as she scanned the pages. I stayed near the bed, clutching the blanket like it could protect me from the horror outside. "What does it mean, morning won't save us?" Tyler finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought these things, whatever they are, don't like sunlight." Sarah looked up, her face pale but resolute. "It's not just about sunlight. These things don't follow normal rules. They're part of something older, something tied to the land. If it's a skinwalker, or whatever this is, it won't stop just because it's daytime." "That's not reassuring," Tyler snapped, his voice breaking. "It's the truth," Sarah replied firmly. "And we need to be ready." Ryan stopped pacing and turned to her. "What do we do then? We can't just sit here all night. It knows we're inside. It's playing with us." Sarah hesitated, looking down at the book. Legends say they're tied to rituals or curses. Sometimes they're bound to a specific place, like this park. If we can figure out what's keeping it here. And how do we do that? Ryan asked, frustration creeping into his tone. I don't know, Sarah snapped, her voice trembling. I'm trying to think. As they argued, the RV shuddered again, a deep, resonant bang that made the walls rattle. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight flickered in Ryan's hand, casting eerie shadows across the cramped space. Whatever we're doing, I said, cutting through the argument, we need to do it now. It's not going to wait for us to figure things out. Ryan nodded grimly, gripping the flashlight tighter. All right, we stay together. No one goes outside no matter what we hear. Agreed? Everyone murmured their agreement, though none of us looked convinced. The banging stopped, replaced by an eerie scratching sound that moved across the walls of the RV. It was slow, deliberate, like the thing outside was savoring every moment of our terror. Ryan, I whispered, pointing toward the small vent near the ceiling. The scratching was coming from above now, echoing through the metal as it circled the roof. Ryan raised the flashlight, illuminating the vent, but all we saw was darkness. Then the voice came again. Emma, it said, mimicking Ryan's tone perfectly. Help me. I'm trapped out here. My blood ran cold. That's not him, I said immediately, clutching Ryan's arm. I know, he said, but it's trying to make you believe it is. The voice shifted, now mimicking Sarah's. Let me in, Emma, it begged. Please. The sound of claws raked across the vent, and then a shadow moved. The shadow darted past the vent, quick and fluid, like it was testing how close it could come without fully revealing itself. I stumbled back, clutching Ryan's arm harder, my heart pounding in my chest. Did you see that? I asked, my voice barely audible. I saw it, Ryan said, his tone grim. It's on the roof again. Sarah stood, her book shaking in her hands. If it's trying to get through the vent, it knows we're vulnerable. We need to block it. Now. Tyler scrambled to his feet, grabbing a heavy blanket from the bed. We can shove this up there. Maybe stop it from getting in. Ryan nodded. Do it. Tyler climbed onto the counter, reaching for the vent. The flashlight's beam wavered as Ryan tried to keep it steady, illuminating the narrow opening. The scratching grew louder, closer, as if the thing outside could sense what we were doing. Be quick, Sarah urged, her eyes darting between the vent and the door. As Tyler stuffed the blanket into the vent, the RV shuddered violently, as though the creature was slamming its full weight onto the roof. A deep, guttural growl echoed from above, reverberating through the thin walls. Tyler froze, his hand trembling as he jammed the last corner of the blanket into place. Is it enough? I asked, my voice tight. We'll find out, Tyler said, jumping down from the counter. But if it's smart enough to mimic us, it's smart enough to try something else. The growling stopped, replaced by heavy footsteps. They moved slowly, deliberately, from one end of the roof to the other. It wasn't leaving, it was circling, searching for another way in. Ryan moved to the door, his flashlight steady, his other hand gripping a fire poker he'd grabbed earlier. We have to figure out why it's targeting us, he said. Why here? Why now? Sarah flipped through her book, her fingers trembling as she scanned the pages. Skinwalkers are tied to curses, but they don't just appear randomly. Something has to call them or bind them to a person or place. Great, Tyler muttered. So who pissed off the desert? I shook my head, trying to think back to the past few days. We didn't do anything. We haven't touched anything, except maybe that spring. Ryan froze, his flashlight still aimed at the door. The spring, he said slowly. Could it be... Tied to the spring? Sarah's head shot up, her eyes wide. It could be. Sacred water, sacred ground. If we disturbed something there, it might have marked us. Marked us? Tyler asked, his voice rising. What the hell does that mean? It means, Sarah said, her tone grim, it's not going to stop until it's finished with us. As if on cue, the RV rattled again, and a new sound joined the growling and footsteps, a low, guttural chant. It was deep and otherworldly, reverberating through the air like a curse spoken directly at us. It knows, Sarah whispered. It knows we're trying to figure it out. And then the chanting stopped, replaced by a single word: run. The word run echoed through the RV, low and menacing, like it had been spoken right next to my ear. My breath caught, and I clutched Ryan's arm tighter. The others were frozen, their faces pale as the oppressive silence returned. We can't run, Ryan said, his voice strained but firm. We'd never make it. That thing, whatever it is, it's faster than us. Tyler paced nervously, running a hand. So what do? Just sit here and wait to die? It's not like this tin can's going to protect us forever. Sarah flipped another page of her book, her movements frantic. We need to figure out what it wants. If we disturb the spring, maybe there's a way to undo it. Ryan turned to her, his jaw tight. We're not going back out there. Before Sarah could respond, the RV shook again, this time harder than before. Something massive slammed into the side, tilting the entire vehicle for a split second before it thudded back down onto its wheels. I screamed, grabbing onto the counter to steady myself. It's getting angry, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. It knows we're not running. The scratching resumed, now louder and more erratic. It came from all directions, the walls, the roof, even the undercarriage of the RV. It felt like we were surrounded, trapped in a cage as something toyed with us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Then, the chanting started again. This time, it was louder, deeper, and more insistent. It wasn't just one voice anymore, it was several, overlapping in a horrifying cacophony. The words were unintelligible, but the tone carried a clear message: we didn't belong here. I don't think it's going to let us survive the night, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan gripped the fire poker tighter, his knuckles white. If it gets in, we fight. We don't have another choice. Fight it? Tyler asked, his voice breaking. Are you insane? You saw it. You said it's not human. How do you fight something like that? Ryan didn't respond, but the tension in his shoulders told me he knew Tyler was right. There was no fighting this thing, no defeating it. All we could do was hope to survive. Suddenly, the door handle rattled violently, the sound piercing through the chanting. My heart leapt into my throat as the door buckled inward, the metal groaning under the pressure. Don't open it, Sarah yelled, clutching her book like a lifeline. Whatever happens, don't open it. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by that mocking, distorted laughter. It was my voice this time, twisted and hollow, echoing from just outside the door. Ryan, it said sweetly. Let me in. He took a step back, shaking his head. It's not you. The voice laughed again, louder this time, and the door buckled further, a sharp crack splitting through the air as the hinges began to give. It's coming in, Tyler screamed, backing into the corner. Brace yourselves, Ryan yelled, raising the fire poker. The door gave one final groan, and then it burst open. The door flew open with a deafening crash, the metal hinges snapping as it swung inward, slamming against the wall. The cold desert air rushed into the RV, carrying with it an overwhelming stench of decay and rot. We all froze, staring at the open doorway, waiting for something to step through. But there was nothing, just darkness and the faint sound of the wind. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe it was over. And then it stepped inside. The creature was impossibly tall, its limbs long and twisted, bending at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its grotesque frame, as if it didn't fit properly. But the worst part was its face. It shifted constantly, flickering between our own faces. Mine, Ryan's, Sarah's, Tyler's, each one warped and grotesque. Its empty eyes glowed faintly like dying embers. "No," Tyler whispered, his voice trembling. "No, no, no." The creature tilted its head, almost curiously, before taking another step forward. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by unseen strings. Ryan raised the fire poker, his grip steady despite the terror on his face. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice firm. The creature paused, its glowing eyes locking onto him. Then it smiled, or at least it tried to. The expression twisted its features into something horrifying, its teeth sharp and uneven. And then it laughed. It was our laughter, distorted, overlapping, echoing unnaturally in the small space. The sound made my stomach turn, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. "Ryan," I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the creature. "What do we do?" "We fight," he said through gritted teeth, taking a step forward. "If it wants us, it's going to have to work for it." The creature lunged suddenly, its movements impossibly fast. Ryan swung the fire poker, the metal connecting with a sickening crack. The creature stumbled back, but it didn't fall. Instead, it straightened up, its head twisting unnaturally to the side as it let out a low, guttural growl. "It's not stopping," Sarah screamed, flipping through her book desperately. "We need something stronger." The creature lunged again, this time aiming for Tyler. He screamed, scrambling out of the way just in time as its claws raked through the air where he'd been standing. "Sarah, hurry!" I yelled, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. It felt useless in my hand, but it was better than nothing. "I'm trying," she cried, her eyes darting across the pages of her book. "I need something to bind it, something to break whatever brought it here." The creature turned toward her, its glowing eyes narrowing. It took a slow step forward, its claws dragging across the floor, leaving deep gouges in the wood. "Get away from her!" Ryan roared, charging at the creature again. But this time it was ready. It caught the fire poker in one clawed hand, snapping it in half like a twig. And then it turned its gaze on me. The creature's glowing eyes locked onto me, and my breath hitched. It tilted its head again, like it was studying me, deciding what to do next. The others were shouting, Ryan, Sarah, Tyler, but their voices felt distant, drowned out by the blood rushing in my ears. I gripped the knife tighter, the handle slick with sweat. It felt useless against something like this, but I wasn't going to let it take me without a fight. The creature took a step toward me, its long, twisted limbs moving unnaturally, the scraping of its claws on the floor like nails on a chalkboard. It opened its mouth, and I braced for another guttural growl, but instead, it spoke. "Emma," it said in my voice, perfectly mimicked. "You're afraid, aren't you?" My stomach turned. Hearing my own voice, hollow and taunting, was worse than any growl or scream. "Don't listen to it," Sarah shouted, slamming her book shut. "It's trying to break you. Don't let it in." "Break me?" the creature repeated, still in my voice. Its grotesque smile widened, its face contorting into a twisted parody of mine. "I don't need to break her. She's already mine." It lunged. Ryan tackled it. Before it could reach me, slamming his shoulder into its torso. They crashed into the wall, the RV shaking violently under the impact. Ryan grunted as the creature swung its claws, barely missing his face. "Get out of here!" he shouted, struggling to hold the creature back. Now! We're not leaving you! I screamed, but the creature threw him off like he weighed nothing, sending him sprawling across the floor. Sarah! Tyler yelled, grabbing a frying pan and hurling it at the creature. It struck its shoulder with a dull clang, but the thing barely flinched. Sarah flipped through her book again, her fingers frantic. I need something. I need sage, or salt, or... Her eyes darted to the kitchen. Emma! Look for salt. Hurry! I snapped out of my daze and scrambled toward the cabinets, yanking them open and shoving aside dishes and canned food. My hands closed around a container of table salt, and I yanked it out. Here! I shouted, tossing it to Sarah. She caught it and immediately began sprinkling a circle around herself, her voice steady as she muttered something under her breath. The creature turned toward her, its eyes narrowing as if it understood what she was doing. No! It hissed, its voice now a blend of all of ours, layered and distorted. It lunged for Sarah, but Ryan and Tyler grabbed its arms, holding it back. Do it, Sarah! Ryan yelled through gritted teeth. Sarah stood, clutching the salt container like a weapon. Get back! She shouted, throwing a handful of salt at the creature. The salt hit its skin, and the creature let out a horrific scream, its body convulsing as smoke rose from where the salt had touched it. It's working! Tyler shouted, his grip tightening on the creature's arm. But the thing wasn't done. It thrashed violently, throwing them off, its screams shaking the walls of the RV. And then it turned, retreating into the darkness outside. For now. The silence after the creature's retreat was deafening. For several moments none of us moved, the only sounds in the RV the creak of its frame and our ragged breathing. My hand shook as I set the knife down on the counter, its uselessness now painfully clear. Is it gone? Tyler whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah, still clutching the container of salt, shook her head. Not gone, just pushed back. For now. Ryan sat against the wall, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. His shirt was torn, and shallow claw marks raked across his arm, already beginning to bleed. We can't stay here, he said finally, his voice firm despite the pain. It'll come back. You all saw how fast it was. Next time, it won't stop. Next time? Tyler said, his voice rising. You mean there's going to be a next time? I'm not waiting for it to try again. I don't think it's giving us a choice, Sarah said, her tone grim. It's tied to us now. We disturbed something sacred, and it won't stop until it gets what it wants. And what does it want? I asked, my voice trembling. Sarah met my eyes, her expression haunted. Us. The weight of her words settled over us like a storm cloud. I glanced toward the open door, where the darkness outside seemed thicker than it should have been, like it was alive. My stomach churned at the thought of stepping out into it, but staying here felt like a death sentence. We have to go, Ryan said again, pulling himself to his feet. He winced, clutching his arm, but his determination hadn't wavered. We'll pack what we can and leave. Now. But where do we go? Tyler asked, still sitting on the floor, his face pale and drawn. It's not like we can outrun it. We head for the nearest ranger station, Ryan replied. There's got to be one a few miles back. If we can find other people, more light, more safety, maybe it'll lose interest. Lose interest? Sarah scoffed. It's not a bear, Ryan. It's not going to just wander off. Do you have a better idea? He snapped, his frustration boiling over. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. She went back to her book, flipping pages furiously. We'll need to stay together, Ryan continued. No splitting up. No one goes outside alone, not even for a second. Do you really think that's enough? I asked quietly. Ryan met my gaze, his expression softening for a moment. I don't know, but we have to try. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. He was right. We couldn't stay here. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with us. As we began gathering our things, the RV creaked, the wind outside howling like a warning. The night wasn't over yet. We worked in tense silence, grabbing only what we could carry. Sarah kept the salt close, sprinkling a thin line across the threshold of the RV door. It's not perfect, she muttered, more to herself than to us, but it might buy us a few seconds if it comes back. Ryan packed a first aid kit and a flashlight, his injured arm hanging stiffly at his side. Tyler shoved food and water into a backpack, his movements frantic and jerky. I focused on gathering anything that might help us navigate the terrain. Maps, a compass, extra batteries. I don't like this, Tyler said, breaking the silence. Running out there? What if it's waiting for us? It's either that, Ryan shot back, his tone sharp, or we sit here and let it rip this place apart. Take your pick. Tyler didn't respond, but his jaw tightened as he zipped up the bag. I glanced toward the open door, the darkness outside feeling more oppressive than ever. The RV felt like a flimsy shell, barely keeping us from whatever was out there, but stepping outside felt like walking into a trap. Do we even know where the ranger station is? I asked. My voice trembling. Ryan nodded. We passed the sign on the way in, remember? It said there was a station about 6 miles back. If we stick to the road, we should be able to find it. 6 miles in the dark? Tyler muttered. That thing'll pick us off before we get halfway. We don't have a choice, Ryan said, his voice firm. We stick together. No stopping, no splitting up. Sarah closed her book, her expression grim. If it comes back, we keep moving. Don't look at it, don't speak to it, no matter what it says. Will that work? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know, but it's better than nothing. The plan was simple. Move fast, stay together, and don't stop until we reach the ranger station. But as we stood at the door, staring into the pitch-black desert, my resolve wavered. The wind howled through the canyons, carrying faint echoes that sounded too much like laughter. Ryan stepped out first, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. Tyler followed, gripping his backpack tightly. Sarah and I were last, her hand clutching the container of salt like it was her lifeline. The ground crunched beneath our boots as we started down the narrow dirt road. Every sound felt magnified, the scrape of gravel, the rustle of dry brush, the faint whistle of the wind. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving us to rely entirely on the dim glow of our flashlights. Stay close, Ryan said, his voice low but commanding. No one falls behind. We walked in silence, every step feeling like a... My eyes darted constantly to the shadows at the edges of the road, half expecting to see the creature's glowing eyes staring back at me. And then, far in the distance, I heard it. The laugh. Faint, distorted, and getting closer. The laughter was faint at first, carried on the wind like a distant echo, but it grew louder, more distinct with each passing second. My legs froze for a moment, fear rooting me in place until Ryan's voice snapped me back to reality. Keep moving, he shouted, his flashlight scanning the road ahead. Don't stop. We quickened our pace, practically jogging now, the crunch of gravel beneath our boots nearly drowned out by the laughter. It wasn't just one voice anymore, it was all of ours, blended together in a haunting, overlapping cacophony. Don't listen to it, Sarah yelled, her voice shaking. It's trying to break us. Focus on the road. But the thing behind us wasn't content with just noise. The sound of heavy, uneven footsteps joined the laughter, closing the distance between us. I dared a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The creature was following us, its twisted limbs moving in jerky, unnatural motions. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and for a brief second, it smiled. A grotesque, mocking expression that made my stomach churn. "It's catching up!" Tyler screamed, panic flooding his voice. Ryan didn't look back. "Run, don't stop, no matter what!" we had. Broke into a full sprint, the flashlight beams bouncing wildly as we fled down the road. My chest burned, and my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't dare slow down. The laughter grew louder, surrounding us, as if the creature was everywhere at once. "It's toying with us!" Sarah yelled, clutching the salt as she ran. "Then don't let it win!" Ryan shouted back. The dirt road stretched endlessly before us, the ranger station still nowhere in sight. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred with tears, but I pushed forward, the fear of what was behind us outweighing the pain in my body. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The creature wasn't just behind us anymore, it was ahead. Standing in the middle of the road, its glowing eyes fixed on us, its twisted body illuminated by the flashlights. We skidded to a stop, panic and exhaustion crashing over us like a wave. "How is it?" Tyler stammered, but his words were cut off by a guttural growl. "It's everywhere," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The creature stepped closer, its movements deliberate and slow, as if savoring our fear. "Don't speak." "To it," Sarah said, barely audible. "Don't even look at it." Ryan gripped the broken fire poker like it was a lifeline, his eyes darting around for any sign of escape. "We're not dying here," he muttered. "Not tonight." The creature lunged. Sarah threw the salt, a cloud of white powder exploding in the air. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream, its body convulsing as it stumbled back into the shadows. "Go!" Ryan shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. We ran, the laughter fading behind us, until the faint glow of the ranger station lights appeared on the horizon. But even as we reached the station, slamming the door behind us, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. And in the silence of that small room, I swore I heard a whisper. "Run." Sometimes, I wonder if we truly escaped that night, or if it's just waiting for us to come back. What would you do if something like this happened to you? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe out there.